Good morning. This is Ladena Day at Acts Ministry. If you were here earlier, I was with Joe Inman this morning on Cup of Sunrise. And then today, Cindy Flowers, Dr. Cindy, could not be with us today. And so they asked me if I'd sit in here and talk about something. So since I wasn't prepared for this, we're going to talk about suicide. And how do you deal with it when someone in your family commits suicide? A lot of people, whenever they first find out that someone in their life has committed suicide, they always feel like, oh, I didn't do enough, or I made the situation worse. I could have stopped them. I should have left them. I shouldn't have left them alone, or I didn't realize how bad they felt. And then they get mad and start saying, how dare you leave me? And I don't understand, but you always have to remember it was their decision. It was out of your control and it was not your fault. There's no such thing as normal feelings in a situation like that. I've dealt with a lot of people over the years that have committed suicide. Unfortunately, a lot of those were very young people. When my son was in high school, I went to 32 funerals for the kids he was going to school with. Some of them were murdered. Some of them were drug overdoses, but a vast majority of them were suicide. And, I don't know what's going on in our world that our children get to the point where they feel like they cannot go on and the only way out is suicide. One boy had said, he would never fit in. At that point, we were living in a neighborhood that was, the vast majority of them were, minority students. And so this young man, he had a family that, he really liked country music. He kept his hair cut short. He was a beautiful child. He was wonderful. But he thought he would never fit in. And so instead of trying to deal with that and figure out that there's all kinds of people in the world and all kinds of people he could involve himself with and so forth, instead, before going to school one morning, he decided that he'd just sit down and took a shotgun and shot himself in the head. There is more to life than what little bit you get while you're growing up. There's an entire vast world waiting for you out there. And, if you've got your heart right and you have a relationship with the Lord, you can find a way out of these particular situations and not have to worry about what other people think or what other people are doing, and just move on your own. Now, myself, I'm always one that gets out there and does what I want, Maybe that's not the greatest situation in some respects, but, I never felt the need to, live up to somebody else's expectations. If I was living the way the Lord told me to live, I figured I was doing good. There was no other reason for me to have to worry about what other people thought of me. What the Lord thinks about somebody is much more important than what your neighbors think. But even at that, if someone commits suicide in your life, you've got to accept your emotions. Don't worry about how you should feel or what you should be doing. And you have to care for yourself. You have to draw on your support system so that you can get by at that particular moment and be able to, deal and process with everything that's gone on in your life up to that point. I've had people in my own family commit suicide, and my husband committed suicide in November. So it's one of the things that, I have to keep reminding myself, I get out my Bible, I read, and I work through the depression I had at that point. A lot of people, though, can't do that. They get into this complicated grief system, and that will lead them to a major depression. psychological trauma, persistent anxiety, maybe PTSD. Our military men and women, you know, they deal with the trauma of all the people that are dying around them, maybe some of their best friends. And, whenever that happens, they've got to figure out how to work through it. A lot of them have to seek counseling in order to get past that, or medications. But your grief in any situation like that, when someone dies around you, that's personal for you. And you should be allowed to express how you feel and express your emotions. If you can't sit down and talk it out with somebody and so forth, keep a journal. Remember that your life was more than just about that suicide. There's more going on in your life. There's more things that you can do to help those around you, and hopefully those around you can understand your particular feelings. And your life, like I say, is much more than just that suicide. And it doesn't matter how close the person is to you. It hurts. It always hurts. But you have to figure out how to work through it and get your own strength back, and remember that it was not your fault. You know, um, you have to expect a lot of ups and downs also, but take care of yourself and be patient in all you're doing. Uh, it was never fun talking to anybody through my church and pastoral duties with anybody who'd had a suicide in their family, because it seems like every one of them wants to take it internally and hold on to that. And we need to remember that the Lord is always with us. And so we need to express our feelings, express what's going on with us, and remain in pretty much constant prayer before we can get past all that and move on to where the Lord wants us to be. Now, most of those who choose suicide, they have a mental or emotional health problem, bipolar disorder, PTSD, and but less than half of those have ever been diagnosed. We've got to remember that you know you can't always see what's going on with an individual. As human beings, we hide our emotions and we hide our feelings, and we forget that if we don't share with someone, how are they going to know how to communicate with us and continue on in their life? We need to help hold them up. You need to help spur them along to get to that point where they don't feel like they have to sit in a dark room and cry all day. And I've seen people who've done that, and it just breaks my heart, because there's so much more than missing the one who took their life. I am always heartbroken when I hear somebody committed suicide, and it seems like in our little town it's an ongoing situation. And most of them I've found who've committed suicide were, middle-aged to older men. They got a bad health diagnosis. Maybe they're alone in life. They don't want to be a burden to someone. So instead of, working through the process, maybe it's cancer or whatever, going in and getting a surgery that is recommended, or chemotherapy or radiation, instead they will just pull out a gun and kill themselves. And a lot of them I've found were veterans, and that just really breaks my heart. Some of my best friends have been veterans, Purple Heart recipients and everything. Now, relationship problems and substance abuse and physical health issues, bullying, legal difficulties, and financial stress, those are all things that will make someone turn to suicide on occasion. And, so someone who's suicidal, they get a skewed view of what's happening to them. And they're in so much pain that the only way they see to escape that pain is by taking their own life. Um, we need to reach out and love to those around us and understand that they're, if we don't help lift them up, then that's a fault of our own. Um, and I think today's world, we see so many people just knocking each other down instead of lifting them up. Excuse me. I always have a persistent cough. Oh, but you cannot be fully, you can't be held fully responsible for something that somebody did under coercion or fear or ignorance, because they're under the influence of drugs or the power of bad habits. Suicide is a sickness that drives a person to death. And, so it ends up being a deathly end um, of a depression. It's not automatic that someone who commits suicide is not saved or loses salvation either. My heart breaks every time someone commits suicide in our town. And the first thing that is said on Facebook or phone messages or whatever the case may be is that, oh, I'm so sorry you won't see them in heaven. Yeah, there's nothing biblical about that. Sure, people point out that the Ten Commandments say, thou shalt not murder. And they take the stance of if you kill yourself, that's murder. No, if you kill yourself, that's a product of a sick mind. That's a product of something in your life that is overwhelming you. And nobody in their right mind would choose to kill themselves. If they kill themselves, they're in a bad mindset. They've got other problems going on besides just the day to day things in life. My own husband, he committed suicide because he didn't want to lay and suffocate there at the house. He'd sat with 4 of his friends who died of the COPD and emphysema like he had. And, they were always on 24-hour watch and stuff like that. And the hospice people come in and they send in the social workers and the psychiatrists and the priests and the preachers and so forth, trying to see what's going on. Well, they've been coming to my house for months, and they had no concept that my husband was going to put a gun to his head and kill himself in one evening. And, they were just floored. And, we had, his son and I had to tell them, he has always said, even before he was diagnosed, that he wouldn't die that way. So I was not surprised, I'll say, whenever he committed suicide, because he didn't want to put his family and himself through all of that pain and agony of not being able to breathe in your own house. And so he chose the easier way out for him. So I can't blame him. I mean, he knew the Lord, and he was willing to take that step because he didn't want everybody else to suffer because of his illness. And if you've got somebody in your family that has committed suicide, you got to think about what their mindset is. What did they want for you? Because a lot of people in the world are going to pull up this stigma and, isolate you because of it. And, they want you to tell them why. A lot of people can't tell you why their child or their nephew or niece or whatever committed suicide. There's absolutely no basis for them to know. I only knew what my husband had done because of the fact that he told me. He told his sons, he says, if I'm ever diagnosed like his friend CJ or something, he said, I'm not going to hang around. I'm not going to have people have to wait on me hand and foot. And so, he took, it was, not unexpected to some degree. It was unexpected as to how quickly he did it. But, you know, he'd gone from a 250-pound man down to 120 pounds. You know, he was less than half the man he was previously. And, you know, he didn't want everybody to have to deal with that particular situation. He didn't want people seeing him as an invalid. And part of the problem was that after he got sick and couldn't get out in the world, nobody came to visit. So if you've got people in your life that are suffering from various illnesses and they can't get out, you know, make it a point to stop and visit. You know, I tend to go out and visit lots of people in my little small town. There's only 1,800 people in the town. But I tend to go out and visit them and try to keep track of what their mindset is at any particular moment in time. If you don't do that, then, you know, they get down, they get depressed, they figure nobody cares. And especially if you're a Christian, you need to reach out and do that for someone. Go out and visit them. You know, even Christ and the Bible, it will tell you, go visit the sick and the weak and the poor, and, you know, try to lift them up in the world and let us, instead of letting them just wallow in their own grief or their own, you know, sickness. You know, whenever we leave people to their own devices, you know, basically, and, you know, you don't see him out around town, because my husband, he was around town all the time. He always went into town and visit with his friends. But after he got sick, only one person came. You know, I even called his family, and a lot of times they couldn't take the time to come and see him. You know, it's like, so he got into a deeper depression than he would have otherwise. If you've had somebody in your family that's committed suicide, though, let go of your guilt, let go of your anger, and, you know, don't be blaming God or anybody else. The person who made the decision to do that is not here. You know, you've got to learn not to blame their family. You know, if a husband commits suicide, don't blame the wife. You know, she probably had no control over it. If your child commits suicide, or, you know, a lot of times you'll find people blaming the parents. Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Why weren't you aware of the mindset of your child? So, you know, myself, I always made it a point to speak with my children every day and tell them I love them every day. And I wanted them to tell me about their day. You know, I was pretty adamant about that. You know, I want to know what's going on in the lives of those around me. And, you know, it's hard to get your children to talk to you sometimes, but you need to make that effort. If you do not get into the habit of talking to your children or your spouse or your friends or whatever, brothers and sisters even, as much as possible, then you don't have the right to be surprised if they kill themselves. I honestly believe that, because I want to make sure that I communicate with those in my life as often as possible. Don't let the surprise come out and just, you know, not understand when something bad happens. You know, and you have to separate responsibility from blame in these situations. You know, if you try to find someone to blame, which is a common response, then you're missing the point that a loved one, you know, has died. You know, don't blame yourself. Don't blame God. You know, God didn't make them do that. They did it in their own head. They made their own decisions. So, you know, don't be blaming God that somebody in your life has died that way. And your loved one is the only one responsible for the suicide, but that doesn't mean that they or you deserve any blame in the situation. You have to stop blaming anybody. The blame lies only with the grief or depression or addiction or mental health issue they were having at that particular point. That's where the blame goes. The blame goes to the sickness. The blame goes to the depression and the heartache. And, even mental health professionals will sometimes miss those warning signs. I had hospice call me numerous times because they wanted to make sure. They couldn't understand why he committed suicide. They didn't see any of the warning signs. And they were just completely floored whenever my husband committed suicide. But they couldn't understand why they missed all the warning signs. And it's like, because he hit them. I sat there when the hospice people were there, and they'd ask him how he was doing, and he would hide his pain and he would hide his depression. And so whenever he committed suicide, they were flabbergasted, and they call me every week or something like that right now, and, try to make sure I'm not getting in that same cycle. But, I am not to the point where I require hospice care. I'm not the one who requires all the extra assistance and everything in life. So, and I have a wonderful relationship with my Lord. So he keeps me going and he keeps me on firm footing. And so, I don't see myself ever committing suicide. But should my health get worse, then, who knows? I've had lots of health issues. I've had a quadruple bypass. I've had a tumor removed from my brain. I have a cadaver bone in my neck and everything else. So I could get myself down and depressed over all those issues, but I refuse to do so because my God is bigger than anything that has happened to me, and my God is bigger than anything that's going to knock me down. And so as long as I keep that in my forefront, then, I can get past anything that comes at me. And you always have to remember to look forward. You reflect on all the good times you had, and instead of feeling guilty, find ways to celebrate their life. Find ways to celebrate in your own life. You're not disrespecting them because you move on. You're just doing what's necessary for you to be able to move on and love on those left in your own life. If your husband or wife has committed suicide, remember if you've got children in your life, you've still got them. Even if they're adults, you've still got your children, and you still have to stay strong for them. And there's no timeline or schedule about the grief that you go through afterwards. They say there's either 5 or 7 different stages of grief. You have the shock and denial, then you get mad, and then you go to bargaining, and then you go through depression, and then you get to acceptance. Fine, get mad if you want to, but don't stay there. A lot of people try to stay there, and, instead of doing that, go to acceptance and hope and working through how to move on in your life without, just getting buried in some depression that you can't dig your way out of. I've seen people get depressed and they just stay there. There's still the good news of our Lord, and there's still the good news of, the Christians around you. I would hope that they would reach out a hand to you instead of making judgment calls. But if you're going through all the various stages, denial of the suicide gives you time to more gradually absorb the news and process it. So that denial is a coping mechanism. Anger, that's a masking effect. It may mask as bitterness and resentment and so forth. But move past that one as quickly as you can too. The person who's gone, yeah, you may be angry about it, but what good is your anger? They're not here to hear it. They're not here to see you doing that. So move past the anger as fast as you can. And then you get into the bargaining stage of creating what if or if only statements. And this is a line of defense against your emotions, and it helps postpone the sadness and the confusion and the hurt. But personally, I say, embrace it. Start, embracing that sadness and confusion so you can move past it. If you don't move past it, you're going to get locked up in some situation where you can't get your mind right and move on in your life, because you can't stay in that situation and be able to move on with your own friends and family. You'll just turn into a hermit. I have told people, well, people tell me that I'm turning into a hermit, but they don't understand that I haven't done that. I've instead chosen to, promote my ministry and to reach out to more people and to help those around me who, in my opinion, are in worse shape than I am. They don't have that love and connection with other people in their lives. I've got all the people here at Acts Ministry. They're amazing. And so, instead of getting into that deep, dark depression and staying there, I have chosen to step out in faith and know that the Lord is working in our world right now. And that, you look at the Asbury revival, and I know there's a revival around here in Humansville this weekend, and other revivals going on around the country. So instead of being depressed, I go and celebrate those revivals. I want to be with like-minded individuals. And, I don't understand how people who do not have the Lord work through a lot of these stages of grief because they don't have that brotherhood or sisterhood in their life that lifts them up and accepts them and loves them through the dark times. That's one of the things that is so amazing about a relationship with the Lord and being the church. Church is not a building. Church is a people. And if you don't have those people in your life and that experience and love from other people around you, well, then you're going to have a hard time getting through anything, really. And then you have those acceptance stages, when you end up having more good days than bad. But even if you have bad days, that's okay. We all have bad days. There's nothing that we do that is going to, nobody in the Bible ever told you every day was going to be happy. I mean, the apostles went out and they were persecuted horribly. They all died just promoting the kingdom of God. But they did it with joy. They were happy to be put to death as long as they were able to promote the kingdom of the Lord and talk about Christ, and they understood from the start that things were not going to be good, especially after Christ was crucified. They knew if they kept going on that somebody was going to hurt them. Somebody was going to persecute them for their actions and their thoughts and their beliefs. And you'll end up with that in your own life anyway. Times are short on this earth. I think the Lord is returning, fairly soon. And that, We have got to start lifting each other up, stop the division in this country, stop this division in the world. It's getting really dangerous, even in our own country. And so, we have to remember that Christ is bigger than all our problems. He's bigger than suicide. He's bigger than the wars. He's bigger than all of that. And if we stay focused on the kingdom of God and the fellowship of other believers, then we'll get through it a whole lot better than otherwise, And I think we'll see more people committing suicide. We're seeing more deaths these days of young people, which is hard for a lot of people to get past. And we've got to figure out that if we lift each other up instead of knocking each other down, that we'll get through life a whole lot easier. We've got way too much hate and discontent, and that's why we have so many people who think that their life is not going to get any better. I hate it whenever young people get so down on everything around them that they figure that's their only escape. They first maybe start with alcohol and drugs and, then move on to nobody's ever going to accept me. So they kill themselves, and the drugs these days that are out on the street, you never know if what you get's going to kill you anyway. So, we have to all be careful and cognizant of what's going on. There is so much hate and discontent in our world right now that we shouldn't have. I mean, we fought forever for our peace and security here. And if the United States falls, it's going to fall from within because people are not able to communicate. So if nothing else in the world, you need to learn how to communicate with those around you. Let your thoughts out to those around you. Let them help you through things. Don't take that final situation that, your dog ran away and you've been depressed anyway, so you just kill yourself in the meantime because you don't want to deal with what's going on around you. We must learn to deal with our own lives. And if you can't do it on your own, then reach out and ask somebody for help. Go talk to your pastor. Go talk to a counselor. Go talk to a psychiatrist, whatever the case may be. If you need help getting through life, then find it. Don't just take yourself and put yourself in a box and not come out and deal with the things of this world. It's difficult these days, and I understand that. But I'm asking you all to lift each other up. Make sure you reach out to your neighbors. Christ told us to love our neighbors as ourselves. And when you ask who's your neighbor, it's everybody. It's not just the person next door. I mean, I live in the middle of 80 acres, so, I don't really have any neighbors. If you want to do that next door thing, it's half a mile to my closest neighbor probably, but they're still my neighbor. You have to reach out and let those around you know that you care, you're thinking about them, and that you want to make sure that they get what they need in life and keep them from those dark depressions. I'm lucky around here. I have such wonderful people. I have Miss Jody back there. And if you don't have anybody that wants to love on you, just come on down here. We'll love on you. Every one of you will bring you in.
We hug every neck we see.
That's right. We hug everybody around here. If you need a hug, just come on down. My daughter wears around a T-shirt and it says, "I'm your extra mom. If you need a hug, come here." And I mean, she hugs everybody. Do that to your neighbor. If nothing else, it'll make them shock. It'll shock them, and they'll turn around and go, "What are you doing?" But do it. Love on each other. Keep them out of that depression. Lift them up in prayer and keep your own self up in prayer. And, smile no matter what's going on around you. If nothing else, it makes the haters just go crazy. How can you do that? How can you laugh? Well, I can, because the Lord said, the joy of the Lord is my strength. And so I have to take my joy and spread it to those around me because I got it from God. And, if you don't know the Lord, give us a call. We'll help you out. We'll tell you where he's at and tell you what to do in order to make your life a little better. Maybe not be easier, but it'll be better. Trust me. Anyway, thank you for letting me talk with you today. And Cindy should be back next week. She does a much better job of sitting here talking. And besides that, she's prettier, and I know that. So anyway,